Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Mark and I thank you so much for coming by today. Have you ever looked at someone else's artwork and thought to yourself, oh, wow, this is just awful? Maybe it was at a friend's house or at a museum or gallery or even on social media, but wherever it was, there was just something about that artwork you didn't like, not at all. Maybe it was the colors, maybe it was the subject matter, or maybe it was the skill level of the artist who created it. I know it's happened to me more times than I care to remember. But in contrast, have you ever looked at someone else's artwork and thought, wow, this piece is just awesome? So much so that you took a picture of it, saved it to your computer, or maybe even tried to recreate it yourself. Again, was it the colors, the subject matter, or maybe the skill that went into it? And for me, I can't remember how many times this has happened as well. Artwork has the powerful ability to move us and trigger our emotions, sometimes positively and of course, sometimes negatively. Oddly enough, most of the artwork we see on a regular basis actually has no effect on us at all. That's right, this is the kind of artwork that offers nothing to stir our emotions or leave a lasting impression on us. We usually see this kind of artwork on social media where we scroll right past it onto the next one. Or in a museum or gallery, we walk right by without giving it a second thought. It's the new song we hear and immediately change it before the song has a chance to develop or build. So, what could be so uninteresting about this work that it didn't even measure up to our lowest standards? Was it the colors, the subject matter, or again, maybe the skill of the artist? These are three typical reactions we have when we experience new art, music, fashion, or even performance art. When we're attracted, we're drawn to a piece. When we're repelled, we withdraw from it. And when it does absolutely nothing for us, we take a passive disinterest in it and usually just move along. For me, whenever I see new art, I can usually gauge how much I like a piece by how much I actually dislike it. Let me explain. What I've found throughout my life is that the majority of art that I like when I first see it is usually because it connects with me on some level which I can relate. Again, the colors, the subject matter, or the skill that went into it. Even more, I've found that the majority of art that I don't like forces me to think harder and examine it more deeply to try to find out why it turned me off and made me want to dismiss it. Judging artwork can be done looking at the basic fundamentals and principles of art. Shape and form, color and value, perspective and composition, and anatomy, for example. Most of us look at a drawing or painting and measure how much we like it by simply how good it is. When the basic fundamentals do not stand out as being flawed or disturbing, then we usually judge the piece as good. However, when those basics begin to abstract or look incorrect, that's when our eye picks up on it. And whether consciously or subconsciously, once our eye picks up on flaws or something disturbing, it's difficult to let it go, as our opinion of the piece forms and our judgment stands firm. This is how most of us judge the artwork we see, based on the initial impression and how much our brain can make sense of what we're seeing. And yeah, sometimes it might even take a few minutes to click. For me, I tend to look at things like the confidence in the work, the lighting, the brush strokes and line work, or whether it's a unique subject that makes me think, or if it's cliché and it's been done 1,000 times before. This is what I respond to, and in many cases, I've come back to a piece that I didn't like, only to find there's something worth appreciating there, something I may have missed before. In particular, I think of this 1992 painting by Peter Hawley called Kirk. I first saw this painting shortly after it was created when I was an art student many years ago. It's a large acrylic and day-glow painting that reflects the style of the Bauhaus movement of the 1930s and the linear abstract work of Piet Mondrian and Theo van Doesburg. However, it's not nearly as inventive or interesting. When I first saw it, I thought it was boring and easy. Yellow bars on top of gray fields. I was seeing my contemporaries at school doing work to me that was far more interesting and engaging. I couldn't understand how this piece qualified to be part of a major museum exhibition. I walked away from it scratching my head. But as I toured the rest of the exhibit, my mind kept going back to this painting and I kept saying to myself, what was I missing? And it really bothered me. So I went back and I gave it another look. I stood there for about 30 minutes staring at this piece trying to figure out what I was missing. And after looking at it for so long, my mind sort of went into this meditative state where I wasn't really looking at it anymore. I had tuned out the sounds around me, could sense my heart beating, and let the painting sort of wash over me. And that's when it happened. Suddenly, as I was gazing into the center of the painting, in the middle of those yellow bars, I began to notice an incredible optical effect that hit me like a rogue wave. The most amazing haze of purple began to appear around the day-glow yellow bars, and the more I looked at it, the more intense the purple became. It was wonderful. I would even suggest you pause this video right here, right now, and try it yourself. Just stop and stare into the center of the painting and let the effect happen in your eyes. So, why does this happen? Well, once I caught on to what was going on with this painting, I realized it was basic color theory. An optical effect I read about back when I studied the work of Johannes Itten. And if you already know how this works, well, please pardon my explanation. For those who don't know, this effect happens when we place a primary color on top of a neutral field. Our eyes take in the light information, which is limited to just one primary color, yellow. Our brain tries to fill in the missing information, the other two primaries, red and blue, by assigning them to the neutral field around the yellow. Red and blue make purple, and that's where the purple haze comes from. Except it's a really intense version of purple that's created only in our brain. It's not really there. And to me, that's really cool. And even though I still feel the same about the rest of this artist's work, this painting has become one of my personal favorites. The artistic epiphany I had with this painting made me realize I should never judge a work of art on first glance without knowing more information about it, like what went into it, the history behind it, and what was it that either attracted me or repelled me from it or made me take no interest at all. Because frankly, who am I to stand here and judge someone else's creativity or work of art? And that's what today's discussion is all about, how we judge artwork, both other people's and our own, and how to properly and intelligently develop an informed, educated opinion of our experience when looking at someone else's artwork. So let's talk about this and more right after this coffee break. In a court of law, a judge relies on his or her years of experience and education to be able to assess a case. Along with that knowledge, though, a judge must also rely on personal intuition to form their opinions. We're taught early on not to judge other people, yet our entire legal system is based solely on judging other people. In my opinion, the same can be said for art, movies, music, or any of the creative fields. When we hear a new song for the first time, we immediately form an opinion based on whether it appeals to us or not. And when we see a new movie or an art exhibit, we're easy to come away expressing our opinions on what we just saw. It's perfectly normal, and it's what's known as our subjective perspective. It's how we measure the song or art based on our reactive emotions. How many times have you said, "I hate that song because they put way too many effects on the singer's voice," or "I love that movie because the special effects were unbelievable"? Subjective perspective is how we personally relate to an experience, event, person, or thing. Now, when we have to rely on the absence of reactive emotions, it's known as objective perspective. This can be more credible because it's based on facts, not feelings. Saying a song is terrible because the instruments were completely out of tune, or that a movie was great because it was based on a true story that kept true to the actual events, can usually have more weight than just saying, "I thought that movie was dumb." And like an experienced courtroom judge, it's wise to apply both subjective and objective perspectives in presenting a well-informed opinion on something. But what exactly are the facts involved when assessing artwork? I mean, how do you look at a drawing or a woven quilt and develop a concrete evaluation? Well, when I was a kid, the grades for art were either pass or failed. And it really bothered me because I took art seriously. Other kids would do the bare minimum and they'd get the same grade as me. The only time someone would fail is if they just didn't show up. These days, evaluating students is much different. Teachers must evaluate student work based on specific criteria to provide a justified grade. When I taught at the college level, I used a list of subjective criteria to grade students by, like in-class work, home assignments, participation, conceptual understanding, and final projects. I only failed one student in my years of college teaching, and that was because she just didn't do the work. At the high school level, evaluating student work requires objective criteria combined with a subjective perspective. There's no more pass or fail. Parents, students, and administrators require a concrete evaluation that makes sense and clearly shows work ethic, development, and progress. And this is where we used a set of criteria called the habits of mind. This method of evaluation is based on teaching, cultivating, observing, and assessing students within the learning environment. The original habits of mind were 16 life-related problem-solving skills developed by authors Baina Kalik and Arthur Costa. In the classroom, we can refine these to 9 specific habits broken down into percentages and, along with a final grade, allow teachers to evaluate student artwork accurately and fairly. What's even better is that we can also apply these same habits in evaluating our own artwork, as well as the work of others with a more informed understanding of their creative process. So, what are these habits of mind? Well, in this context, a habit is a pattern of intellectual behavior that can lead to a productive action. And understanding these behaviors and the actions they may produce help us understand an artist's creative process, while also being able to apply both our subjective and objective perspectives. These habits of mind can help track progress, keep students on task and focused, measure their abilities to see skill improvement, and help assess their involvement and intent throughout each phase of a project. Again, these habits of mind can also be applied to our own creative process as well. The following habits are the criteria I used when teaching at the high school level. And like I said, these can be used in assessing student work, but can also be a valuable tool in considering the work of other artists as well as ourselves to have a better, clearer insight as to what went into the work. So when we say, "Wow, that painting is just awful," perhaps applying these habits of mind can help us rethink that subjective perspective and get us to look at the piece more objectively with an open mind to understanding what really went into it. So it's not just a picture on a wall or a song on the radio. Let's discuss these habits of mind and how they can help us when evaluating artwork, both our own work and the work of other artists. The first habit is persistence. This deals with the amount of time, energy, and focus put into our work. It's about how we stand firm and forge through challenges despite all factors. In most creative projects, a point comes when we feel overwhelmed or that we're out of our depth. Being able to see our way through that point and figure out how to make the project work is persistence. And this accounts for 10% of a grade and is evident in any piece of work where it's clear there were challenges. Number 2, experimentation. This is how we move through the different conceptual options in approaching a project. It's how we explore different materials, mediums, and techniques and how we're going to execute the project without limiting ourselves and seeing all opportunities as available to us. Experimentation also accounts for 10% of a grade, and the result is evident in a piece in how fluid it looks, especially among other pieces in a collection. Number 3, purpose. This is the realization that we're going into a project for a specific reason, not just because we have to or because we're bored. And having a purpose is to have intent to satisfy a goal or directive, whether in class, for a client, or just for ourselves. Purpose is a subjective perspective, so it isn't factored as a percentage grade. It can, however, help influence the other habits. Number 4, planning. This relies on how capable we are to plan out a project and having a clear scope of how it will unfold before we even begin. I've had other discussions on the importance of planning, like the importance of planning a color palette or the power of pre-sketching. I'll put those links to those videos down below if you'd like to check them out later. For me, planning can actually be the most vital step in any project, from fashion and decorating to illustration or design. Having a complete plan will not only save time in all areas, but it can open the door for more confidence and a more intelligent approach to a project. We're all tempted to just grab our materials and tools and just start right to work. But without a good plan in place, from conceptual studies, color swatches, or a written outline of expectations, a project can easily drift off course or fall apart very quickly. And while planning accounts for another 10% of a grade, it's usually evident in a final piece that is tightly cohesive to a collection or extremely well executed. Number 5, expression. The ability to develop well-formed conceptual ideas and communicate them, whether to a teacher, to our peers, or even to ourselves, is essential in working through roadblocks or solutions that may lead to problems later. Communication skills are vital for most creative people. Being able to express ideas and to be open to the ideas of others is important to the development of a project. I've worked with students and colleagues who sometimes had difficulty expressing their ideas. Then, when left alone to develop their project, they'd run into problems they weren't able to work out. The result was often a project that was unrealized, that didn't follow the original plan, or was weak in its execution. So 10% of a grade goes to expression, which can be seen in a project that communicates clearly and effectively. Number 6, reflection. Reflection is the element of introspection, looking soulfully inward, that we exhibit through the duration of our project. A brutally honest self-evaluation of critical feedback we share with ourselves to recognize potential flaws, shortcomings, or even successes in the work. It's also the ability to take critical feedback from teachers, peers, or contemporaries and sort through to find gems of truth to help improve our process and our work. And again, it's 10% of a student grade, but shows in the time and consideration put into the final work. Number 7, craft. Craft is simply the way we execute our projects effectively, on task, and with our own abilities. Most students learn from copying the successful work that inspires them, whether it's basic woodworking projects, creative fun crafts, or drawing intricate Zentangles. For me, I used to copy everything from comic books to catalogs, finding everything to be a worthwhile resource. But nowadays, unfortunately, the internet allows easy access to so many images that many times people think it's okay to just copy someone else's work and put their name on it, calling it their own. There's a big difference in learning a craft or skill by practicing and just replicating what someone else has done and slapping your name on it. So 10% of a student grade is in the craft. Yet, when we go to a gallery or museum, or even look through a magazine, we can see how important craft is to a piece by how well the artist utilized materials, executed their project, and whether the piece retains a unique sense of style that is different from anyone else. Number 8, observation. Much like reflection, observation is one of those hands-off habits that is more concerned with our intense examination of our work and process and those around us, making constant mental notes which we apply toward our own work. One thing I teach almost every student is to step back about 10 feet from their work in progress and look at it. Then to turn it upside down and look at it some more. I encourage to observe the work surroundings and see where we're getting lazy, where we need improvement, and where we're taking shortcuts. Observation isn't as critical as reflection, as it's based more on the evidence that occurs during the creative process. In my professional career, I have to literally walk away from my desk or computer, go get something to eat or wash up in the restroom, or even go home and sleep on a project. This allows me to break the connection I have with the project, look at things around me in a completely different way, and then come back to the project with fresh eyes. While it's not something noticeable in our artwork, 10% of the student grade is earned from their observation, which I evaluate by observing them myself. Number 9, maintenance. For me, maintenance is a big part of my own work. It's the way we treat our workspace, our materials and tools, and it's the attitude and how we prepare for a project and clean up afterwards. I have a hard time working if my space is disorganized. Even on my computer, if I have too many files on the desktop, I usually put them all away before starting something new to make sure I don't overwrite something else. Once I get started on a project, well, that's when things get messy, and that's normal. Brushes, paints, pens and inks, devices and cables, well, they tend to litter my workspace. But a personal habit I developed many years ago was to maintain my space and keep my tools in excellent shape. Materials and tools cost too much money to be left out, abused, or damaged. For a student, this affects their grade. Maintenance accounts for another 10%. For a professional or a hobbyist, it can affect the production or the quality of their work, or even in the attitude that they share with potential clients. Many artists prefer a space that's messy and cluttered with tools and materials, and that's how they like to work, which is just fine. But in assessing students' work, or even our own work, that clutter and messy attitude can often show up in the work. And lastly, number 10, the final project. The final project is worth 20% of a student's grade. It's the culmination of all the habits applied together and exhibited in a final presentation, performance, or piece. A final project doesn't fully exhibit all the aspects that went into a work, much like a car doesn't exhibit all the individual components under the hood. A final project reveals everything that went into it, and if there's a deficiency, it will show. In my experience grading students, there have been plenty of high grades, but no one has ever received 100%. Because in every evaluation, there's always been something that needed improvement, attention, or some adjustment. Nowadays, when I visit a show or museum, I try to use these habits of mind when looking at a piece of art or hearing new music. I think about how persistent the artist was in coming up with the initial ideas and working through the challenges. I consider the experimentation they did to see what materials or techniques they could have used. I look for the purpose of the piece, to see what message it holds, what function it has, or the emotion it tries to evoke. I question the planning that went into it, and whether it looks rushed or well thought out. I ask myself whether the piece expresses the artist's views, ideas, or thoughts clearly, or are they obscured? And often I'll step away from the work and reflect on how my experience was with it. Was it good or bad? I regard the craft that went into the piece, seeing what confidence there was in each line, phrase, or stroke. I observe how the piece looks in its environment, as well as within a body of work, and if it makes sense. I also examine the work to see how well maintained it is, whether it's defective, not made well, not cared for, or if it's even falling apart. Like I said, I can apply these habits of mine to my own work, seeing how well I adhered to each one of them throughout my own projects. And when I do, I'm able to go from looking at my work with a subjective perspective to a more objective perspective and make adjustments where needed. Of course, it doesn't always work, and often I'll see areas that are flawed or need improvement after the piece has been finished or released or published. Sometimes I kick myself because while no one else may notice it, I notice it. And that's what this is really all about. Being able to create work, understand the purpose behind it, and give ourselves a fair and honest evaluation to help us improve and become better at what we love doing. Also, it's important to remember that while using the habits of mind to better evaluate artwork, to understand an artist's process, it is by no means a way to judge the work of other artists or to hinder the creative spirit from being expressed. To me, I would much rather see an untrained expressive work of art that's all over the place than an overthought, overproduced, cliché body of work that draws no inspiration or emotion no matter how good it looks. I hope you enjoyed this video today and that the discussion was meaningful for you. I'd also enjoy hearing your thoughts on this topic and your experiences in how your artwork has been graded, so please feel free to leave your comments below. Thank you so much for watching today, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do, and I'd love to bring you more content like this in the future. As always, I'm grateful for your time. Thank you so much again, and God bless.